And now, time for the Philosophy Power Hour.
Welcome, everybody, to the 5th edition of the Philosophy Power Hour. Introducing our members. Firstly, a man whose brilliance can push people to the end of their rope. The philosophy undergrad, Dio-sama. Secondly, working on his PhD in philosophy, a man who is not afraid to go swimming with the piranhas, Dave the Dastard. And finally, a man who can juggle 3 tennis balls, your host, Shadow Starshine. How is everybody doing?
Whoa! Can you?
Yeah, I can.
I can't juggle. I can't work it out.
All right, guys. So the premise is simple. Each of us will come with a prepared question to ask the group. It can be any kind of question that provokes philosophical conversation and interest, so long as it's not too complicated to ask or takes too long to explain. Then we're going to rant on the topic until we either all agree, we're too angry, or too bored to continue. At that point, we'll move on to the next person's question down the list. During the segment, you can ping questions at me, and whoever sticks around can try and answer them afterwards. Make sure to check out our YouTube channel, Philosophy Power Hour, for any missed shows. So the last time we had Dave's question, yours was, can we develop new values, or are they always just linked to old ones? Dio, that would mean your question is up next. What do you got for us?
Well, my question is, are there true contradictions?
As opposed to false contradictions?
As opposed to false contradictions, yes.
Can you possibly give me a distinction on what those would be?
So are you familiar with the liar sentence? The sentence is false, or the sentence is false. Another version is the sentence is not true. Possibly even further, another version of the sentence is Q is not true, where Q is the proposition Q is not true.
Okay.
So
is that a true contradiction as opposed to a false one?
In a sense, there's the idea that all contradictions are false, in that they cannot be true. They can't be the case, so to speak.
Okay.
So and one of the term it's given in sort of Latin is ex contradictione quod labet. Hopefully I didn't fuck at Latin up, but that's the term it's given. It's called the principle of explosion. Otherwise, that the inference from P and not P to anything fails.
Okay.
So the idea here does something like the liar's sentence or paradox indicate that this is indeed not the case, that there could be true contradictions.
I don't even know what it's reporting. Like, this sentence is false?
Yeah.
Is it really expressing something? What does it mean by it to be false?
Right. So the standard. So there's a bunch of ways to like analyze the liar sentence, but the easy start way is to say, okay, well, let's suppose that this sentence is true, right? So if the sentence is true, well, then it would be false.
Of course.
Correct? And if it was false, then it would be true. But then if it were true, it would be false again. You see?
Yeah,
so if we were to suppose, if we were supposed to say that this sentence is false is true, then it would be false, but then it would be true. And then you just keep on going, and you can't, there's no way in which to indicate that that the sentence is indeed either true or false. It seems like the sentence has to be both, if we're going to say that it's meaningful.
Well, I don't even know if that's the correct way to even look at the question, what the statement's saying. Like, if you're asking me, is this a proposition? Is this a sentence? Yes, it is. Like, I don't care what the sentence proposes. I'm saying that it is a sentence. So in that sense, it's true. It's truly a sentence.
But I'm not. My proposition isn't whether this is a sentence or not. My proposition is whether the sentence is true.
Yeah, I know, but that's what I'm saying, is it's not reporting for any sort of truth. It's not saying what's true.
But it is, right? So let's take this. Can you say is truth a predicate? Is then what you should be asking, is truth something that you can declare something else in sort of like a vacuum, right? Can you say something like Q is the case or Q is true? Can I say something like the bed is true, or perhaps some proposition is true? Could I say that some proposition Q is true? Can I say that?
This is just a language game.
It's not. It's not in this case.
But I think it is, because
regardless of context,
we would say the sentence. We would say the sentence is true, in as much as the sentence is there, just as Q is there, so Q is true. But that doesn't mean that what Q reports about itself must necessarily be accurate in its details.
Yeah, when you say the bed is true, I don't know what you're talking about.
What the information that the sentence is reporting, the information contained within a sentence, when it's referring to itself as that sentence, does not have to be accurate or true. That's a different sort of discussion to have.
So when you're saying that, so you can't say something like, you'd have to say something like there is a bed, right? Or that would be something of the existence. That'd be a declaration of the existence. But you couldn't say something like the bed is true, because that's not like a full proposition.
Yeah, that's
what your view is?
That's about what I was about to say. Is that you haven't said what about the bed is true.
What about the bed is true?
We might linguistically understand it to mean, the bed is true means it's truly there. It truly exists. But
but I'm not declaring that of the
exactly.
bed.
So that might just be a misinterpretation of our understanding of the sentence. And maybe the sentence isn't actually saying anything. Right.
So is your belief then that the truth of something has to be okay? Well, there has to be something that it's true about, right? What are you saying is true about the sentence, right? And I could reply, well, that what I'm saying is true about the sentence is whether the sentence is true.
Well, I don't think that's an actual thing, though. How is it a thing?
Okay, so let's think of this proposition actually, this is a proposition. This sentence is a proposition. Is that true?
I don't think it sounds like you're saying anything.
Yeah,
the sentence is a proposition. I'm not saying anything.
Oh, the sentence is a proposition.
This sentence is a proposition. I'm not saying anything about that.
Yeah. Okay.
Or am I?
Yeah. Yes.
I am. Okay. So if I were to say that this sentence is a proposition, I would obviously be saying something meaningful. So we can get self-reference to the very sentence itself. So what I'm saying about the sentence being a proposition is that I'm saying the sentence is a proposition. Another way to say this again is I could say Q is a proposition, and I could keep evaluating whether Q is a proposition, and the proposition that Q is that Q is the proposition. So I could keep on going and going and going, and it'd be recurrent. I just flow back forth into the proposition over and over again, and I can continuously say Q is a proposition and evaluate whether it's true. And it seems that Q is a proposition, right? This is a proposition is a proposition, right? So in that sense, the answer is obvious here. Q is a proposition, so therefore it's true. But the problem becomes with something like truth as a predicate, because if we declare truth of something, we might say that, well, unlike the proposition case, we're not talking about the existence of it. We're not talking about whether it's a proposition or not. We're just saying whether it's true. Yeah. And your disagreement is that, oh, well, you can't just say that something's true. Is that what your view is?
Yeah. It feels like the same as saying a sentence. This sentence is really, and then just ending it. It's really what?
I suppose when you're saying that this sentence is true, you're saying this sentence is true in what it is saying.
Yes, that would be fair.
But it isn't saying anything.
What is it saying? It's saying that the sentence is true.
No, it's not saying even
this sentence is. It's like so. If it was to say this sentence is true in saying that it is false, then what would occur? I would just say that the sentence is.
It would be. No, I mean this sentence is true. What am I saying about the sentence that it's saying something true? Well, that's meaningful. I could say, yeah, okay. Well, if the sentence is true, then if it's true, then it's true.
I'm unsure.
If I were to suppose that it's saying something true, then it would be true, and then there's no problem.
I feel like when you say something is true, you're saying it's truly something.
It's truly something. So you're saying that I can't have. So in the case of the sentence is a proposition, what am I saying the sentence is truly something of?
Now you can say this sentence is truly a proposition. That's different than just saying the sentence is true.
So I can't have truth as a predicate, essentially.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, I don't think it makes any sense.
Could I say that?
I agree with Shadow on this. I mean, imagine if we was to say the bed is not there, then that seems to be saying something of meaning. But if I was to say the bed which is not there is coloured blue, then have I actually described the colour of the bed? Because there isn't a bed there to be coloured blue. But on the other hand, if I say the blue coloured bed is not there, then I've made sense. But this is just a language game. We're getting confused about whether the sentence makes sense grammatically, if it makes sense. We're getting confused about whether the content in the sentence is actually true or not true, i.e., is there a bed there or not? And then the third one is that when the sentence refers to itself, as in, this sentence is true when it tells you that it lied when it said it was true, we're now entering a third sort of dimension where it's going even meta, where we're asking, can a sentence refer to the truth of itself without undermining itself when it refers to itself? And I would just say
what you said just meaningful.
Which part?
That the sentence can refer to its truth. Can a sentence refer to its own truth?
No, I don't think a sentence. It's not the sentence, which is a sentence is true in as much as it's grammatic. It's grammatical. That's it. That is the criteria of a sentence being true. It follows the rules of grammar. To speak any more about the truth of the sentence is to speak about the content of the information being given out, even if the content of that information refers to the rules of sentences and specifically the sentence in which that rule is being expressed within.
If that was if a sentence was true or not dependent on grammar, then you could say the invisible pink unicorn, right, is a true sentence because it suffices the conditions for it being grammatically the case. But that's where you have to be saying something more, right? And in the case where you said that the bed is the bed that is not there is blue, right? I think that in the case where you're saying that the bed that is not there is blue, I mean, you might saying there exists no I mean, you're proposing. This is where the existence is not a predicate might come in. You could say that, well, you have to suppose that there exists some bad, right, for which there doesn't exist a bad, which is blue, right, which seems more problematic, right, than the other case, right, in the case where we're talking about the sentence.
But
this is exactly why I've made the distinction.
You don't think it's a proposition?
Yeah, I don't. No, but
this
is
just
think saying something is true just without any context is even a proposition. I just don't think you can have a sentence like this. This is very. I think that's what the sentence is. This thing is very, and then it just ends. Something has to be truly something. Like
but that's. Yes, but this is the case in both distinctions I'm making. Of course, if all it took for something to be true is that grammatically it made sense when you say it, such as the invisible unicorn. The invisible unicorn on Thursday feels angry unless he has his beer. Then sure, so long as the sentence is grammatical, then we would be allowed to say anything like this, and we would always be right. But this introduces the second dimension of the discussion, which is the truth of the content of the information being presented in the sentence. Now, I think I agree with Shadow, but on both grounds. On one hand, if you finish a sentence midway through, such as it is really the case that, then I would say no proposition has been made, both in technicality, because there's been no content information described.
How about this then? I say,
but also grammatically,
everything that Canadians say is true. Let's take that first belief, right? Everything that Canadians say is true. And then I
believe that
Canadian say that that Shadow is lying, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if everything a Canadian says is true, then if I say that Shadow's lying and he's lying, then he's saying something true, right? But if he's saying something true and that he's lying, then he's saying something that's
that I would say
not
is
true.
I would say you're making statements. Obviously,
it's no different from the liars, though. It's just a different way to state the liars. In this case,
I think
it is different. It's different because you're describing Canadians and not the sentence itself. That is the difference. Because, for example, everything Shadow says is the truth. Then Shadow tells you something we know which is wrong. Well, he truly is still telling you a lie. But the meaning of truth here has now changed in its meaning. This is just a language game problem.
Yeah, I don't think so. I disagree. The reason I disagree was actually the first way that the liars was formulated was something like all of X says is true. X says that they are a liar, right? And like what follows from that. That's the first way that the liar sentence was actually said. So the reason I disagree, right, is because it entails the same thing that something like this sentence is true or false does. The only difference here is that
it has content.
Well, okay. Why are you saying that in one case it has content and the next it doesn't?
Because X is something. It's something of which could be true. It's saying this thing can report truths. But when you say this sentence is true, it's not talking about what could be true. You're saying the sentence as if it's a thing, but the sentence it hasn't been a thing yet because it has no content in it.
The sentence has been a thing because you just said it in a sentence.
Right.
The sentence is true because that was a sentence.
I mean, it's truly a sentence, but it's not reporting of any content at all.
But that identifies what I've been saying, that there's a distinction.
Well, I agree with you, Dave.
And I think what's happening here is it's just a confusion between the two language games. And it's just that some sentences which report that they are lying are just really good little puzzles at doing this. But it's ultimately just a language game because in response to someone saying, this sentence is a lie, I say, no, it's not. That is a sentence. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a broken sentence. It was a sentence. It was a statement. But they would say, well, I didn't mean lie by that. And they say, no, you mean lie in the sense that you talk about the content of the information. And that's a different discussion. And that, in my mind, just shows that an actual contradiction hasn't occurred there. There's only just been a miscommunication between language games.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think I agree with Dave.
All right.
Right. So, but I can
guess.
still. The thing is, no, I disagree. But you can still. The problem is, I can still perform the same problem, right? Even if you suggest that it's meaningless, right? In the case where I suggest that all of what X says is true, X states, X is a liar.
Well, what is X? X is a thing, right?
X is a thing or a person. I could say all of what Diogenes says is true, and then I say that I'm a liar.
Right.
Right. So if it's true that I'm a liar, then it couldn't be true, right?
Yeah. Well,
that everything I say is true.
I agree.
But if it is the case that, right? But this is the thing, right? The same paradox of exists, right? Which is all I was trying to get at when I was talking about the liar's paradox.
I don't think it's the same paradox. I don't I think it's a contradiction. The second thing you did there, that's a real contradiction. One of those has to be not the case.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's the same as saying the sentence is true. I think that's devoid of content. I don't even think it's coherent.
I wouldn't go as far as Shadow on that though, but
so you do think the ancient liars then is
Yeah, but I don't know what you mean by a true contradiction. That was your first the first question. I think you've actually set up a contradiction, but I don't know what you mean by a true contradiction now.
If I think I finally remembered what the original liar's paradox was. It's called. Okay, so it's in the form of a sort of poem. So it goes like this: a Cretan, the talk of the centuries, called all named Epimenides, called all Cretans liars, threw logic into the fire. Now he is just called by obscenities.
Man, because you said that in a poem, I now agree with you.
Yeah. There you go. I win.
You won my
guys.
romanticism. That's what you've done.
Yeah, there you go.
I didn't even understand. As normal.
You know what? I'll paste in chat.
You put it in a poem, and I've no longer understood it. Here
you go.
And Dave now agrees with it.
Dave agrees with me because it's now a poem.
That's all it takes. That's all it takes. Put it in a poem, and you win me over.
No.
But yeah, well then in general, then I think we've came well. Unless you think there's any more to go on with this topic, shall we move on to the next question?
Sure.
Okay. Well, that would put my question next. My question is: can anyone do anything outside of their own interest? What kind of interest can you do something outside of? What about things like involuntary movements? So I wanted to discuss broad form egoism, whether or not it is distinct from altruism or not, or whether it incorporates altruism. And then I wanted to talk also about if we think that in order to do movements or to do things with our bodies, what is an involuntary movement then? What kind of brain function is that, or is that just randomness?
But you could be glad that you've done an involuntary movement, such as an immediate reaction to a quick object coming towards you, and you just jump out of the way immediately. It was involuntary in the sense that it wasn't under your conscious command. You're jumping out of the way before you know it.
I think that's a bit different than I don't know if I would call something that's not phenomenological involuntary. I'm thinking more what if you have a twitch? You just have an eye twitch or some sort of nerve disease. This is a way of moving your body. So some sort of information has to be being processed in your brain but it doesn't seem to have like a teleos to it. It just does it.
Well, that's kind of why I was raising this point, because I wanted to know more what you meant about interest. Do you mean that we would only act out of our own like value set, so we would only ever do what we value, or do you mean that all actions we do, we might not be because of the values we have now, but because of the values we may think we might have in the future, which may be far different than at the moment? So it's make it a long-term decision, for example. I mean, what do you mean by interest?
I mean, then that's going to be like just two different interest calculations, right? Like I'm calculating my interest of now, and I'm also calculating my interest of later, and then I would assume the brain decides which one of those is more important, and it does accordingly to that action. But I'm wondering, like, can you do something outside of your interest? Like, can something be truly altruistic in a sense that it benefits you in almost no way? And if it has to benefit you in some way, what is the minimal way in which it has to benefit you?
Well, what if you do something which does the complete opposite? It's actually very bad for you, and you know it's very bad for you.
Mm-hmm.
Or perhaps if you're in ignorance. So what if you're doing something which is very bad for you, which if you knew better you wouldn't do? So you're actually doing something which is against your interest, and you're just not aware of it. Well, would that count?
Well,
I mean, I would just cite the example of ataraxia, weakness of will, right? So, I mean, are we talking about intending to do actions that go against your own interest, or what?
Yeah, that's what I would have said, is that I don't think then there was an intention to do so. And I would assume that whenever we do a value calculation, it's based off of intention. It's based off of our understanding of the result, not the actual result itself. That's information we will never have.
What if you knew that eating cake now will make you dislike, your weight, like the calories, but you eat cake anyway, right?
Well, I mean, I assume if you're doing that, it's because you want to go for the taste, and in the moment, the taste seems to outweigh the calorie consideration.
So you would view that there isn't a weakness of will there.
A weakness of will? Well, that phrases it as if there was a correct choice, and I don't think
like
there is.
you might value your weight over like a good weight, meaning like a healthy weight, over eating cake, but you also think cake tastes great, but you don't think cake tastes great more than you think that your weight is, your healthy weight is valuable, but you still eat the cake. And that would indicate some sort of weakness of will.
I don't know if I would ever phrase it as such. Like, that's what happened. I would say then, by default, the taste mattered to you more. How else would you have done it?
So you think that actors can't have a weakness of will?
Yeah, I don't think they could have a weakness of will. I think you can have regret. You could eat the cake and then decide, the taste wasn't actually worth it. I don't know why I did that.
I think you can have weaknesses of will, but so I could imagine a person as they develop in their life, realizing that they're becoming more resilient as they grow older, perhaps, and then they say, well, I'm not as weak-willed as I used to be. I'm not as susceptible to being tricked or to being following my passions. I'm now more rational and thoughtful about the consequences of my actions, and in that sense I'm stronger-willed. Maybe, but what I'm interested in more is that I don't think that if we were to give an example of a behavior which has not been done out of self-interest, you would say has been done by the phenomenological self. So if I was to say, let's imagine it was shown that quantum mechanics can due to particle uncertainty or whatever, can actually influence the decision-making process in an indeterminable manner and in a way which isn't under any control of the individual. And it results in a sudden jump in the air for one reason or another.
Right.
And I would say, well, there's an action that's happened, that person has performed, which is not in their interest. I could imagine you to say, well, that wasn't from the person, that was from the quantum uncertainty. I'd imagine you to say something like that. And my worry is that you would not, we could not answer your question.
I feel like that
because
would
if we
be
were to,
just, that would be unfair, because what are we if not for just what makes us up? And if quantum indeterminacy or something like that was a piece of what we are, then it would be unfair to say that it wasn't a part of us that did that.
Sure, but I'm of the, well, from what I know of your ideas, you likely think that what comprises a person is their value set. That is what a person is.
Yeah. Well,
so
I'm
in
not
that
sure
sense,
if I would say that's what the person is, but I would say that's what their behaviors are.
Well, if their behaviors is well, I would say the person is their value set. It more in the sense that it's not just their behaviors, but it's also how they how they literally construct and see and understand the world. It's their life goals. It's their moral system. It's their traits and characteristics. I think it's more than just are they sometimes kind or not. I think it. But putting that to the side, if a person's behavior then is just a manifestation of their value set, and you don't think you can contradict a value set, then it can't be the case that a behavior could occur which is not in the best interest of that individual. When by best we mean it is what that individual truly understands to be good, whether they're actually right or wrong or not.
Right. Well, I mean, this goes back to our previous discussion of different types of value sets. Like I said that a brain can calculate in a way which can't be translated into an English language for us to be able to understand why we did that.
Mm.
Right? So we'll do an action, our brain will calculate and say, this is the best action to do. And then when we ask for the understanding of that in English, all we get is a poor translation. And we sit there confused, like, I don't even know why I did that. I don't have the words to express this.
Oh, no, I completely agree. The language of our heart is different to the language of our brain. We feel emotions and we think thoughts.
Why
and they are different languages. They're just different languages. How you feel emotions is different to how you think about mathematics. I think it's just a completely different process. Or at least phenomenologically, it's different. I mean, phenomenologically, when I'm thinking about this now and discussing it with.
Okay. Oh, we might have Lewis.
Yes, sir.
Lewis might be coming in.
We could only dream.
But getting back to my topic, I wanted to talk. What is the difference between egoism and altruism? Is there any?
Was that his question?
Who, my question? It was
no, Dave. Oh, not Lewis's. Sorry.
No, this is my question.
No.
Well,
then why did you say no to the first?
Is all of altruism a part of egoism? Is it outside of it?
If your theory,
so.
Yeah, I would say definitionally so. That they're different. But if your conception of how behavior works is correct, then all things are egoistic in as much as they are based on the values that the individual holds and can't conflict with them. And we're only motivated to avoid the bad and do the good. So all actions are always going to be in your self-interest, whether intentionalism or consequentialism is true, whether there's karma or not. It doesn't matter how good or bad actually exists, like in the world or not in the world, so long as your behaviors are motivated only because of your value set, then everything's going to be egoism.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's my point, but like, I don't know if there's anybody who disagrees with this. I mean, I'm sure if Lewis was here, he would have something to say about it, because he seems to think so, that we can get outside of that form of egoism. But I also don't know if I'm just being too broad with the idea of egoism, because some people.
I think there's a difference between egotistical and egoistic, right? So you might say that you're egoistic if you're going after some like basic sense of all motivations, like centering on the self, sure. Like your opinions on what you think is good is what motivates you. But really, if you're egotistical, you're a sort of person that has what other people think are questionable motivations that don't involve the opinions of others, right? Whereas a lot of the times we think that like most of our decisions, right, and our opinions involve some process of empathizing with others, understanding them, looking at what they like and dislike, a life of interaction with other thinkers and in other actors. But these sorts of people don't really take that into account, and that's what we would probably call someone selfish, egotistical.
I agree with you on the egoist and the egotistical distinction. Although I feel like a lot of people use egoist and egotistical as synonymous. They're just the same thing. And I feel like there's a mistake being made there. But I agree with you. People who are egotistical don't make other people as one of their end values, right? Like, it could be the case that part of one of your values is to maximize someone else's values. That's just a thing I want to do because I value them. It's become a part of my set of values. Whereas somebody else just might not have other people as an end point for their values, and we would just call them egotistical.
So yeah, I'll just type it. I'm thinking of a distinction. Oh, Lewis is here.
Hey, Lewis. Are you there, Lewis?
Hello?
Hey, there we go. Now I get to introduce Lewis because I didn't get to say my joke for Lewis, and it was my best one. What does our next guest have in common with Bart Simpson? They would both tell you not to have a cow. With his masters in philosophy, his masters from the YouTube channel Perspective Philosophy, it's Lewis.
Hello.
See,
yeah, I'm sorry about that, guys.
I would have been upset if I didn't get to use that one.
Oh, he's been talking about this all day. He's been kept up at night with trying to scribe it all out. Bless him.
What question was asked then?
I was asking if we can actually do anything outside of our interests, and basically,
let's go.
Basically, the difference between egoism and altruism.
Oh, we kind of had like a little bit of a chat on this, like, and I was saying that you take like a Hobbesian definition of desire, like you can't define desire as so you can't want something that's undesirable because it would then be desirable, just a different form of desire.
Right. I don't know if you want to chime in on the opposite perspective, but it sounded like the rest of us were agreeing on it.
Yeah.
I think that's
only because you've defined it in that way. I don't think and I would say that definition is too limiting because it'll be true for all moral systems. All moral systems hold the view that if you do good things, then it would be good for you. Whether in of itself it's good or you'll reap the profits. No moral theory says if you do these good things, bad things will happen.
I think you've gone too far on that one, Dave. I wouldn't even agree with
no,
that.
I'm with Dave. I'm with Dave.
Name me a moral theory. Name me a moral theory that says if you do these good things, then you'll be far worse off. And that is actually a good thing. And so you should do the good. No moral theory says that.
I feel like you're putting it now a different way than you just said it.
I mean, here's the thing, right? Like when we say the good thing is good for you, right? We're talking about in line with your values, right? But I've had this conversation with you, Dave, and I think that morality, that when we're talking about the morality that moral objectivists are concerned with, it doesn't matter what your value set is. Regardless of your value set, there's rightness and wrongness to actions. And in the form of deontology, you're obligated to those decisions, regardless of whether you think it's you think you like it or not. Your liking it, you liking it or not has nothing to do with the rightness or wrongness of the action. You're still obligated to do it.
I know
In fact, that
Hegelian
could
wouldn't.
lead to it being more good if you don't like the action.
And then I would come along and say, well, if you did follow that rule, it's because you value the rule.
No. I would say I don't think what the point Dio has raised is actually an objection. I don't think that's the case. I would say that, sure, moral objectivists would argue that you can be mistaken about what you think is good for you or not. You might think that smoking 80 cigarettes a day is going to be brilliant to you, and your criteria of goodness is having perfect health. Whether you're that delusional, I don't care. You are mistaken,
Right.
and that is the case. So we can make objective statements, even if that is just on the basis of validity. The difference of the moral objectivist is to say it's more than just validity. It is actually soundness. You're actually mistaken in not valuing this as much as it ought to be appreciated. That's a separate step. But I could.
How does validity and soundness step into this? I didn't quite get that clarification, Dave.
Well, sure. So if typical to moral objectivists is that they would claim that despite how you feel about something, you can be right and wrong. Now, if we was to say that your criteria of goodness is having brilliant health, and yet you're smoking 40 cigarettes a day, and we highlight to you that that's actually to detriment of your health, and yet you just don't acknowledge it or think this is somehow an exception. Cigarettes don't work in that way. Then we would say, well, you are mistaken. But we would say you're mistaken in validity. You said this is what you want, and we've shown you that if you do this, you're going to go against what you want. And if you don't recognize it, we'd say, well, then this is something we need to work harder for you to realize. So
it would be both valid and true if you're talking about reason's internalism.
Well, no, because the reason why he's saying that the difference is that you could then say, well, actually, you know what? There is no truth in the fact that I want to smoke or whatever. So I don't want to smoke or whatever, or that I care about the outcome. So the point is that it can only be considered, it can only be valid and true against the truth of those axioms in which you have that unfortunately going to ask
But
yourself.
then there would be a fact of the matter. Like the thing is, right? Your passions are a fact of the matter. I can tell what your passions are. Like you might say, my passions is this, my passion is that. That those can be statements of fact, right? Now onto the reasons leading from those passions, right? The validity of that is whether the conclusion just follows from the premises of your passions. Now, if it does, then it's valid, right, and true, right?
Well, I don't know. Because I think
doesn't,
consistency is something that you have to value in the first place to say that it's.
What do you mean consistency?
Because if you
you
can
can't
have
be a moral particularist.
No, what I'm saying is that, for example, you could say that I care about my health only so far as it does not contradict my smoking.
It does not contradict what? You cut out there.
My smoking or something like that. So then you could have, for example, two contradicting value sets, in which case you adhere to them when you feel like it. I mean,
well, yeah.
I
think that's just the case, is that we have a ton of value sets that conflict. That I can only have so much of one of these. Just like we were talking about earlier with the cake and health, right? I want to eat this. It tastes good, but I know it's going to make me fat. I have to fight between these two values. One of them needs to win. I either eat the cake or I don't.
But those are two different experiences, though, I would say. I would say that me wanting to eat the cake is a different sort of sensation than me rationally calculating or bringing to my awareness the ill health that is associated with that. When I'm thinking to myself, well, I shouldn't eat this cake because it'll lead to bad health, I'm not feeling any suffering or any sadness or harm, perhaps disappointment, but only
bad
disappointment
health is definitely a suffering experience, though. So you're definitely still
when you're having it. When you're having it, not when you're not having it and thinking about it in the future. At least not in the moment when you look at a cake and go, should I or shouldn't I? You're in that moment, you're feeling the passion of, oh, that looks really nice, looks appetizing, I really want it. But then rationality says, well, actually, the consequences are probably not that great. but it's not as if a new sad set of values have been introduced to you, and now you're overwhelmed by worry and fear and anxiety. Some people might be that way, but typically that's not how I live my life.
We're getting on my question, guys.
Let's suppose you're. I think in both cases, what you're doing is imagining the consequences, both of eating the cake and that potential moment, because you haven't eaten the cake yet, and the future effects of then eating that cake and then having bad health. Like, you can imagine both, and both are experiences. So I don't see there being like a problem. What you're doing, I think, is weighing the those potential experiences.
Shall we, like, if we're bringing it back to the question, like, which was, can you desire something which is not in your interest, though? Well, it depends on, like, I think we need to clarify a few things just to make sure that we're not talking past each other. So if we say that an interest is literally just my well-being, and not something that I can desire in the first place, so not just a preference, then
I wouldn't go too complicated with it. I would just say,
because I don't think that's complicated, because I think if you say that, like, for example, I think you need to make that distinction, because if you don't make that distinction, then if I say, like, I want someone to be happy despite my sadness, then what I'm removing from the equation is my well-being. But you could then retort and say, yes, but that wasn't what my preference was. That wasn't in my interest, because you've combined preferences and interests. Now, what I'm saying is, if there's a separation between well-being and preferences, then you can desire something which is not in your well-being or not in your interests. So it depends on what we define as interests first.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that would be analytically the case, right? Because you just decided to separate them into those two boxes, right? So
yeah, I'm saying if you don't separate them, then I think then desire is.
Then it's just
it's impossible. If you do separate them, then what you're saying is that there is a split between what, like, egoistical desires and altruistical desires. Is like, is this for my well-being or another's well-being?
I feel like those are hedonic. Like, there's a concept called psychological hedonism, which is to say we do things for very specific sensations, like happiness or pleasure, and that everything we do are for these, positive emotions. And personally, I think that's completely incorrect. We don't jump in front of a car and save our daughter for the happiness we feel about it. We just happen to have a value set that says, daughter more important than my life.
I mean, you could argue that you might have the feeling in the moment of like valor or courage.
You could argue it, but I don't think it's necessary.
And that's why you have that. The thing is, right, it's like psychological hedonism is nearly impossible defeater. Meaning, like, what I mean by that is it's nearly impossible to defeat, because you could suppose almost any instance in which it's correct.
Yeah, I mean, like, you could take it to the point, unless you're being, like, masochistic. Like, absolutely. Even then, I think you're still hitting.
Then,
you'd still be deriving pleasure. I mean, you could do it empirically, where you just strap some electrodes to someone's head.
Yeah, you can test it to see if they act in that way. It'd have to be purely empirical, right?
I think it's a useless conversation, though. I don't think, like, to say, like, all right, well, like if we do make the distinction, then it's not useless. If we don't make the distinction, then what we're saying is that all we can say is that we act, and that acting comes, like, the act of volition comes from ourselves, from the self, and that's all we're actually saying about it. That we are willing. But
that's quite a different thing, right? Than something like Dave's view of like, my view of what like morality entails, like things that go beyond what you will. So whether you will to do the good or not doesn't matter. The good's still the good. That's like end of conversation, right? Regardless of whether you will to kill this person or not, it's good, right? To not do it. or something.
Perhaps, but the point is that like if you take like can you just to make sure, can you desire something that is not in your interest? Well, if you've already could you reiterate the question, Shadow, just to make sure that we're doing.
It was just, can you do anything outside of your interest?
You see, in which case, I think then you've already presupposed an act of will. So if you're saying, can you desire something that's not in your interest, and then you could go, well, you could make the argument, yeah, you could desire that which was undesirable. In which case, I would say that like I would have to say that that's impossible, because I'm like I would take a political ethical stance, like I'd just be like that's impossible. But there are people that might argue that like, well, what you've done is you've conflated desire and interest. In which case, I would say that you've then, in which case they would say no, that is your fundamental flaw, and that's the only argument they can make.
So we have 10 minutes left, and I don't know if this question has steam. So I'm wondering, what should we go from here? What is your question, Lewis? Do you think we can do it in 10 minutes?
Well, I mean, probably. I mean, it's a pretty small question. What is moral value?
No.
Oh my god, no.
What is the self and what is moral value? Thanks, Lewis.
What is moral value? What is the self? We get 10 minutes.
Are you trying to say you're not as man of a philosopher enough or something, big boy philosopher enough to do this question in 10 minutes?
Are our eyes real if mirrors aren't real?
Well, should we try
to never thought of it that way.
You know what? Let's start it for the last 8 minutes, and if we want, we'll just jump into it next time. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good, man. Like, I'm game.
I think
you're game for any question, man.
I'm always game forever.
Well, I think what'd be good with this question, though, especially if we only got 8 minutes, is that it would allow us to actually show the differences in how we're even approaching our discussions on ethics and morality. Because it's literally just asking what do we think it is. So for my mind, it's not a good question to ask. Like, what is moral value? It's like it is what you experience when you feel remorse. That is moral value. It's like what is it? What is emotional value? It's like, well, it just is what it is when you have it. I'll wait until the next time you're in a moral dilemma and then ask you, and then you will know. I mean, that is what it is.
Nah, because I would say that it's based off what it is. Moral value is the categorization of any given, like a good or bad experience, and then understanding the good or bad experiences of you and other individuals in which you value and why.
I would say moral values are certain types of good and bad experiences.
Yeah, no doubt. In which case, like, I will say that, like, but these are subsets of an overall good life, and that's that. I think that's what I think virtue ethics goes under. Like Aristotle starts the Nicomachean Ethics with all basically all minor goods fall under the subsequent majors. All falling under what it means to live having lived the good life. In which case, that's what I would say. I'd say, like, for example, you start with the idea, like, what is the good life? Like, what world do I want to see? Who do I want to be? And what world do I want to live in? And then from that point on, then you start breaking it down into smaller and smaller considerations based upon actions within that. And that ultimately will then change the greatest end as a whole, as you honor those values. Because as you honor the particular values of any given end, you'll eventually end up promoting a different end. Now, this is kind of Hegelian philosophy. So what he would say then is, like, you start off. Well, I read a paper on it. It was like an institution has a given subset of rules. Within that comes with honoring certain values. So you would say, like, honor, truthfulness. And then, but by honoring truthfulness, you realize that why you honor truthfulness is in this, institution. And then you honor it, and then you realize that the institution doesn't fit that value anymore. So then you end up having to modify the institution to honor the value properly. and eventually the values change to fit the institution. So it's like a constantly renewing cycle.
I don't know what the hell you're talking about, but
Right. Right.
I am okay. So my journey into morality has just been a lot of just questioning what the hell are people talking about when they're talking about it, and are they making any sense? So some people, might not make any sense to me. But what I find is that, everyone has interests, or this is why I feel like aesthetics and moral statements aren't so different, because I think they are subsets of interests. It's just that the moral ones are the ones with such importance that we just wouldn't want the world to be that way. It's what if I have an interest for ice cream and I don't get it, I'm okay with that, right? So I would put this under maybe an aesthetic preference. But when I see someone murder someone, I wish the world not to be in that way. And that's my kind of understanding of what makes a moral problem.
See, what I would reply to you there, though, is that the reason that you would separate those into aesthetic and moral, because you see it as more valuable, is because the moral value itself comes from individuals. It's intrinsic to you. It's intrinsic to those who can suffer, who can create value within the world. Because we wouldn't say, like, what does a rock value? What does a plant value? Because they can't value.
Well, I don't even think they can have aesthetic preferences at all either. Like,
well, yeah, that maybe not. But the point is that once an aesthetic preference would not bring harm to the valuer. So, like, for example, looking at something you find distasteful would not harm you.
No, I don't. That's just being too loose with harm, or not loose enough. Maybe too narrow.
No, I would say you're being too loose.
We only have about 3 minutes, so Dio should probably give his preface so we could have the conversation next time.
I mean, what do you mean my preface?
Well, why don't you just, how do you approach the question of what is moral value?
I might say that look at, what people who say moral value is usually say about it, and moral value seems to move around a lot as a view of what's morally valuable. So, I mean, I just tend to go on to analyze the discussion and then give my opinion based on how
I agree with you, but what would commonalities do you think pop up when people have these discussions?
Commonalities usually occur that something of moral value is different than something like one's aesthetic preferences, right? That murder is a wrong thing in the world, separate from anybody viewing it as wrong. And then there are other views, right? That the morality of an action isn't wrong, independent of any viewer, but dependent on the viewer. And even in that case, right? There's still this idea that there has to be a systematic view of or a universal view of why that thing constitutes a wrong thing or a right thing, rather than any sort of just whim, right? And then and then we could analyze further to say, okay, well, if that's the case, if morality, even if it's dependent on some subject, has to be a universalized view of actions, those actions have to have reasons that follow from other similar moral views, then you could further figure out whether that's the case, if there are such views that people have to have. And I would disagree, right? I mean, I don't think that.
So I asked you for your view, and you tell me.
Well, my view is like an anti-position, right? So.
You only lie in opposition, but don't you feel like people are talking about anything that is coherent at all?
Yeah, I think they are talking about something. It depends on which view you're going with. For the mind-independent stuff, they're not talking about anything that makes sense. Now, for the mind-dependent stuff, You can say they're making things that make somewhat sense, right? But the thing is that they've just gone and fucked up how the reasons work when you're working internally, and they think that you have to universalize it. And that's just something further that I think that they have to figure out. And then once you eliminate all those things, it just you just stand up and just get to something like basic preferences, mere preference, which is supposed to be distinct from morality. But since it isn't, you figure out that you just either eliminate the word morality as being vacuous or just apply it in the same context as we would preference.
Okay. I think me and you are more on the same page, Dio. But we're going to wrap up this episode. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We're going to take some questions. I only have one at the moment in my DM. There might have been, I think I saw some people having conversations about questions, but nobody actually sent them at me. So,
I don't know. They're having like a separate discussion. I'm like half paying attention to the discussion and stuff.
Okay, we'll take a look at this question that I was left. Does everyone in the voice chat agree that regardless of your particular value set, there are things that are absolutely good and absolutely bad? No. That's a big no for me.
I think, yeah, because people's value sets are wrong against what is actually good and bad. So
I don't even know what that means.
it means that like you've mischaracterized, misunderstood like what the values are. So like you might see something and think it's one thing, but really it's another. So like you might look at a situation, you might think you want to smoke, you don't want to smoke because if you value your health, then clearly you've got a contradiction values of your value sets. And I think that's apparent in all humans.
Yeah,
so
but
we don't.
It has to contradict one of your value sets, so that has to be
well.
that it's.
Well,
there.
I mean, the point I would make is that where you get your values from, like, is in relation to the value of you and in the good life in the first place. Because obviously, I'm trying to say I'll be arguing that good and bad, they're not subjective. Like that, it's not something that we just create out of thin air. It's something that it's in relation to what we are, and understanding what we are is how we come about understanding those values that we should have.
He wanted to clarify the question, asking, "Does good and bad exist independently of humans?"
Independently of human.
I'm going to take that as a more broad question and say independent of anything that can consider good and bad things, right? Because I mean, if we got aliens on another planet, then sure. But no, well, I don't think any of us disagree that if there was anything to perceive good or bad, then there is no good or bad.
No, there's no good or bad if you can't.
Oh, well. Well.
Where are you going with this, Dave?
I'm thinking about the account we would give for the behavior of animals.
He's thinking while saying this.
Which cannot conceptualize goodness, but certainly act in ways which would be accounted for through their value set. And then we would say it is good for that animal, despite the fact that the animal has a conscious idea of the goodness of the act. So we say it's evolutionarily beneficial that it has fought off that rival because it can now mate.
That's an equivocation on
evolutionary. Evolutionary.
But
yeah,
no, well,
it's both an equivocation, right? And if you say if you are saying that is not an equivocation, you're saying like it is good, right? Then I want to know why you think that why evolution has some like, I don't know, some conceptions of good or something that which depend, some teleology.
It's not that. It's not that there are conceptions of good which somehow genetics has discovered. It's that if it is the case that value sets are in the most fundamental positions innate to humans, and if it is the case that humans have evolved, then we would say that the value sets have an evolutionarily based account. And it would seem to make sense that if evolution is a process, that would be as if a system of values. And so I could imagine...
we would say that there's animals with different values, right?
Sure,
I mean,
but still
evolution just selects... Evolution is a process of selection, right? So the process of selection is for survival. That's just the process of selection. It's just why do we see the current animals we do today? Because they survived.
The
right?
question that was asked is a little more basic.
Quite trivial.
And
I don't think that
it was just asking us if you need minds in order for goodness and badness to be a thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think we're all pretty.
I'd still say, well, oh no, I don't think so.
This is the thing.
I don't think that's the case. I mean, of course, you need a mind to be able to conceive of the existence of good and bad. But if good and bad aren't actually real things anyway, not in like an objective sense, but that there certainly are value sets and there certainly are experiences of the subjective good and the subjective bad, then I would say you would be able to have the fulfillment of those values without a mind being consciously aware of them happening.
I mean, if you say it's pure conception, then I would agree. No. I think I know what you're getting at, because this is the distinction I try to make with ask yourself. So, for example, if there was no minds to perceive value, then there would be no subject in the first place to have value. But if you could have a being which did not comprehend the value it was experiencing, it could not conceptualize it, but it could, feel the value. That value exists, whether or not they've conceptualized it or not.
So I've just said, take a fish out of water. It is experiencing its subjective bad, but has no mind to conceptualize it.
So
that is what
my argument is that it exists in mind.
Am I the only one against this now?
I think that the fish can't perceive any difference between something like the world and its values.
It's just not subjective. There's no subject.
See, there is a subject.
Is the fish,
and there's a mind. That's the.
Well, I'm not sure about the mind part, but
the subject is only a distinct categorization we've made for the fish. It's not the fish making that category.
What the hell do you guys think a mind is?
Not necessarily unit? A subject.
Can you? So you think that you can have you think you could have a subject without consciousness?
Is your computer a subject?
No, I'm not arguing that. I'm saying, could you have a subject without consciousness? Could you have an unconscious, like totally unconscious, incapable of valuing subject?
I think
you've destroyed what
perspective. If your computer can have values for things, which I think it can, pretty sure it can have values for things.
It doesn't. No. You see, what I would do.
Your computer doesn't have preferences.
It doesn't have preferences. Not at all.
Doesn't have preferences.
I disagree. Like, if you're going to talk behaviorally, a chess AI has values. It evaluates moves.
It doesn't. Yeah. But the categories are hierarchical. The values are just distinctions between each other. They're not actually hierarchized in any given experience. There's no subject.
What?
If we understand good or
yeah, sure, they're hierarchical. That's how you figure out what move to make.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's only hierarchized in relation to to its action, as in like what process is given. Not necessarily more value. Like, it depends on what you understand value to be. Is it in reference to itself? Like, good or bad? Good and bad are in terms of desire. It's you can't like what is good is desirable. It is to be desired.
Itself. This is the thing that the computer doesn't have. Is it doesn't have a concept of what the hell it is. That's why it doesn't. None of the things
it doesn't have value. It doesn't understand value. It has nothing to understand the value. It hasn't conceptualized it.
I agree with Larissa.
I think I really pulled it off with the computer.
I'd say it has no mind to conceptualize the good and the bad, and that furthermore, the AI that is designed or rather programmed to play chess has no hierarchy of values. It would be absurd to say that. It is programmed with an end goal, and it performs calculations. And it's not as if it makes a free decision. It's not as if it has before it
we don't
four
make free
options
decisions.
and the AI decides what to do. No, I know. This is why I would go so far as to say that there probably isn't a mind distinct from the material. This is why I would go so far as say only in conceptions of language do we have a sensation of mind. Really, there is just the material. I would take a route of linguistic epiphenomenalism. That's
I think you're just using the word.
Is that like Minsky's? Is that like Minsky's
I think
virtual
that there's
mind?
a difference between experiences and subjects, right? So here we go with something like a mere subject, right? like when we were talking about like differences in experience, the experience that we have, right, is probably nothing like, quote unquote, what it's like to be a computer, right? Like a computer doesn't have a like to be in a sense, right? But I still think it has like something like the most basic processes of like preference or values because we calculate in that, meaning selection over other actions.
Yeah.
So
that's where I
that's
agree
all.
as well.
But that's not what I think we would mean, unless we're to say humans are just the same. Because humans don't
Well,
have
they're
any
not.
more or less free choice than a computer.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that the experience is identical, right? Or that that like the idea of something like happiness is within the computer when it's selected one move over another. Like these are very different things. Like our experience of happiness is probably quite different than a computer selecting of one move or winning a chess game. It just doesn't have these sorts of experiences at all.
It doesn't have
That doesn't-
experiences, so it doesn't have value. That's the point.
It has mere.
That's
I would
'cause
say
you're
it
just
has.
defining it that way, Lewis.
No, man.
well,
It
Because
doesn't
like,
have
a-
experiences in a sense that we do. It's
A
essentially what
painting
I'm
doesn't
saying.
have experience, but it has value.
What? No.
oh my god, where you taking?
Yeah, if someone
How
I've-
many
I've said this before.
equivocations do we need in
If
this
someone-
conversation?
I've said this before. It's not equivocations. It's that I think that the language being used is already unspecified and unclear.
I
I'm
agree.
uncertain what you mean by hierarchy of values within a computer. Like what
A
are you on about?
computer can
Because
work
a value,
somebody
a value in this sense is
there
something
to
that
command
drives
it.
behavior, right? It derives an action out of possible action. A painting doesn't take an action.
Yeah, but it's not driving behavior.
It's not
just
driving.
acts.
Yeah, it's not. There is no drive.
There's
There's
no
no
more drive
drive
than my
here.
leg kicking out when you hit my knee. There's no
Yeah.
drive here.
Yeah, I
It
agree.
is
Like the
just a
reason
response.
I went on like, and I had a look for a definition of a subject. So like, this is what I got: like a thinking or feeling entity, the conscious mind, the ego, especially as opposed to anything external to the mind, right? The reason, like, I think that's actually a decent definition is because it in that definition it says a thinking or feeling entity, the conscious mind, the ego, and the problem is like, as you can see, we're all working on, like, for example, does it think? Okay, well that's a subject. Oh, wait a minute, does it feel? Well that's a you see what I'm saying? So it depends.
But then that's a different definition, because most people, when they say subjective experience, they're talking about phenomenological, right? They're not just.
That's
point-
fair. That is fair. But I think we could separate it. We could say that like a computer doesn't have phenomena, right? That's pretty big.
And
like,
then we could dispute whether animals have phenomena.
I think animals probably do have phenomena, but
Yeah.
well, certain animals have phenomena. I think like something like ants probably don't have phenomena.
it's like qualia, isn't it?
That's where we're using qualia the same way. Like computers don't have qualia at all. There's not a thing like there isn't a way to be a computer, or like a way to be an oak tree or something like that. Like I don't. Like that doesn't make sense to me, but there might be a way to be like a duck or a cat or something. I think those things probably have qualia. And then there's
I disagree.
I don't.
So
see
if we
why
say
they
that there's a
wouldn't have
difference
qualia.
between like qualia value or whatever, and like the valuing of what something is, and then just numbers themselves as a value, because that's it. Like, it depends on what you understand value to be. So if we want to continue this at all, someone define value.
I think it's too late. I think we're done, right?
I hope so.
Well, I think we went far and beyond what the question asked of us was.
You've just guessed what my question will be for next week.
so we can look into other questions, and if people have questions, please PM me or ding me for them. We have
Ding?
Yeah, just ping.
Oh, okay.
Ding with a P.
Ding with a it's the same thing. Facts versus truth. Now, I don't even... I'm trying to figure out what that question is asking me. Is it like asking what's the distinctions between those words? Facts versus truth?
Nyef, can you explain that? Is Nyef here? I don't think Nyef. I think they're gone.
Well, I'd say someone could be telling the truth, but not be actually saying a sound fact. So
Yes,
could
that's
say,
not possible. They'd have to. If somebody's saying the truth, they're saying something that's a fact.
No, I think you could be honest. You could be honest in the sense that you're telling the truth, but you're honestly mistaken in what you believe to be the answer.
No, then they're not telling the truth.
Yes, they are.
No.
God, no, they're not. No, they're not.
Yeah, no, because the truth of the matter can be taken in two respects. Are they being truthful, or are they correct? Right? In which case, like, I would say, like, that you can have knowledge of a fact, and that would be the truth, because the reality is, to have the fact itself is the objective entity in which cannot be perfectly conceptualized. So, like, for me to describe any given object, value, whatever in the world is impossible. I tell you the truth. I don't tell you the fact.
No.
I might agree with you, Lewis.
I'm not gonna say that. I think there's a weird distinction before, like, telling the truth, right? I mean, like, when we're going to say, like, telling the truth, and say that this is a statement of fact, right? Like, that those are identical. Like, telling the truth is a statement of fact. There's no difference between those two things. They're synonyms.
If it was the same thing, then we would be using lie detectors all the time for all matters of legal significance. But we don't use them because a person can be convinced that they're telling the truth and will be telling the truth because they're giving the most accurate report to how they understand their experience. It just so happens
the most accurate report is not necessarily the truth. Yeah, well, if it's false, then it's not true. See, this is the thing, right?
There's a few. We're always in semantics.
This is just a language game. This happened right at the beginning of the discussion. There are two different language games at play. There is the content of the information being accurate, and then there is another discussion about the relation of the individual who is presenting that sort of information. They can be not lying to you, but be mistaken still in the content of their information.
Yeah, I agree with that. I
agree.
No.
Think of people who hallucinate and say there is a bear in the room. They would be lying if they said there wasn't. They are certainly experiencing one, but we know there isn't.
In lying, there's an intention here, and this is what you're mistaking. In lying, there's an intention. Intention is incredibly important. Some people don't believe that intention is important to lying. Some people do. Now, if you're of the opinion that intention is important to lying, whether you intend to say something that you don't have the attitude of believing is true, is quite different than you not saying that's something that's true, right?
But what when you lie, you give a fact? What if I sincerely think that 2 + 2 = 5, and so when you ask me what does 2 + 2 equal, I lie and say 4, but I'm actuly factually correct. My
intention to the attitude. Intention, yes.
Well, that's the
I intended to
deceive,
but
well, no. Look here. What you said was that truth and fact are distinct.
Yeah.
Right? They're not.
Well, how do you tell me how you breach your subjectivity to give me the truth? Then, like, what is the truth? Like,
well, I'm not
then you're
going
to tell us that everyone never speaks the truth, because that's what you're going to have to come to. That we'll all speak in reference to our experience.
How would then?
Because we're all referencing our experience. All we're saying is that our statements are true in regards to our experience. That I perceive this value in the world. That I perceive whatever, but I can be mistaken. Now, if you're saying that if I'm mistaken, I'm not telling the truth, then no one ever tells the truth.
Yeah, if you're mistaken, there's the if, right? You could also be correct. Now,
no, I would argue that you can never 100% conceptualize the physical world, the actual world around you. You can never know.
That doesn't mean that you're wrong. Wait,
Unless
1 second.
There is no
Like, that
physical
doesn't.
world.
Right.
Stop
even
it.
if
You stop it.
here's the thing, right? Here's the thing, right? In the case where we're talking about, oh, you can't say anything true. Well, is that a true statement, right? And we're just gonna evaluate that. And if we're gonna sit here, is I think it's a different thing to say I can never know, meaning like in the classical justified true belief sense, right? That this is indeed the case, right? But that's quite a different thing than stating that everything people say isn't true, right? Because then you'd actually be making a true statement, and you come up with something like a paradox there.
Yeah, so you're saying that what we'll have to do is to distinguish between think and know. In which case, the truth is in reference.
Having
in reference to a justified belief. In which case, I would argue that's just that's based off the aggregation of experience in which we validate or endorse your belief in the first place.
So we're looking at truth in two different ways. There's the dichotomy of truth and a lie, which is an intention, and then there's the truth and false, which sounds equivocal to fact, right? Does anybody disagree with that?
The truthful, okay, so again, I think like Tenurups is saying in chat, intention is the difference between lying and being wrong, right? So if I'm intending, right, to give you something I think I've justified belief for that being not true, right, not a statement of fact, right, then in that case I'm lying. I don't think that this thing is true, and that's what we mean there.
And I think that's the distinction we were making earlier.
All right, then in that case, you just weren't being clear enough, and I cleared it up. Thank you.
No, I literally told you.
We were
I
all
literally
on the same
told
page,
you.
Dio.
I literally told you that if a person sincerely thought that 2 + 2 = 5, they sincerely thought that, and when asked what does 2 + 2 equal, lied and said 4, they would be giving a lie, but a true fact. That is the distinction.
Let's go to the next question.
You weren't clear on the intention part there.
For Lewis, can multiple forms of anarchism coexist?
Oh, I wish I'd never put anarchism in me. God damn.
Why?
Because I keep getting that's everyone wants. As
take
in
it less seriously.
No, it's just because like anarchism just opens the door to too much shit. It seems to be so broad. Like I didn't even realize how much shit can go on in anarchism. I just meant that I want free association.
Just say you don't know. That we can.
It depends on what you mean by depends on what you mean by the multiple forms of anarchism. Do you mean like multiple forms of free association? In which case, like for example, you could live in various forms of associated groups. So like one group might associate themselves in one political form and another. In which case, I don't see the problem why that wouldn't exist. So long the issue that's going to happen though is how do they obviously coexist peacefully. So it's kind of like with Hobbes' Leviathan, where he says the Leviathans fight. You're going to reach a point in which the collectives, they create a new community of collectives, and that is the free associations of communities. So they can exist so long as they decide that they want to coexist. So it's all down to the volition of the community.
All right. So that was for you. We'll move on to the next one. I don't even understand this question. Thoughts on synchronizing aspects of traditionalism and progressiveness?
I think that's politics, man. I don't know.
Wait a minute, what was it? There is definitely something to be said there. There is some stuff that because like I think even like the funny thing is that like if it's like why do we associate ourselves with progression or conservation regardless of the content in which we would progress or conserve, that I see as purely irrational. And I think that someone like Gadamer would give you good insight on that, because he would talk about Bildung. Tradition is neither good or bad in itself, but needs to be judged rationally as an authority that can act upon any given individual. So what we need to understand is this good or bad in the first place, and then accept or reject it? Should we progress towards something better, or should we conserve what is good already?
Yeah, that's pretty much my opinion. It doesn't matter whether it's progressive. It doesn't matter whether it's traditional. It matters is whether or not we should want it.
Whether we should want it or whether we do want it.
Whether we do.
I think it's a lander. Yeah.
He's gonna go into a moral domain there.
Whether or not.
I see. Again,
I don't
Dave, I
care if you want it,
disagree
not you
that
ought to
morality
want
is
it.
what we should want. I disagree. It's just what is right or wrong, and it doesn't matter whether we want it or not.
Right or wrong would be the criteria of what we should want, because we'd realise that what we are wanting is wrong, and so we should not want it.
You might say no. See, this is the distinction, right? If you're going to say that, then you could just say the good is what you ought to want, but that's distinct from what the good is. So
I would say entailed within the good is a desire for it.
Does it always come back to this? Why?
Because this is where we can never agree. This is like
it doesn't help that I don't even know what my opinion is on this. I don't even know what I think.
I don't know what I think, but I know that everyone else is wrong.
Yeah, you three can't be right. That's as simply it.
Well, okay, so I don't think any of us.
That's the opinion of practically every philosopher. So,
does any of us really have a distinct opinion on whether traditionalism is better than progressiveness without regards to what we like?
No, I think to say either is irrational.
Yeah, like they don't have merits on their own. Or maybe what do you think, Dave? Because you're sort of traditional.
I am kind of traditional. I do feel that we underappreciate some very old ideas that are still in existence. Sounds very much like Jordan Peterson now, doesn't it? But that the fact that some ideas have stuck around for a very long time show, at the very least, that they have a good applicability, utility as well. We
could just analyze those, right? I mean,
sure.
Yeah,
but I guess what I'm saying is that there's a danger of just saying, well, if it's traditional, and it's old fashioned, we'll just toss it aside.
I think you can't equivocate like value in something that's just something that's not being challenged. That's the point. Like really, like there's times when you could have traditions which are just simply unchallenged and are accepted, and there'll be traditions acting on us that we're not particularly challenging, that maybe we even care to challenge, but that doesn't make them good or bad. And whether we'll conserve them or progress from them is a discussion of when they come into the forefront of our lives, in which case it's like, do these matter? For example, like a state in which homosexuality was not accepted wouldn't matter if there wasn't gay people, like.
Yeah, but this is the thing though. I mean, if I was to be asked to put aside our general preferences and wants towards them, and I would say that we could say that certain traditions are good for society or for cohesion. And it might just be the case that humans don't often like social cohesion. We might be pretty asocial. We might be quite antisocial, and we don't like collecting together. I would much rather be able to do all the things by myself and not need to interact with some people. But because I know I need to interact with some people, it's good to have certain rules at play, which makes that as painless as possible, such as ritualistic behaviors of manners, perhaps, or common decency.
I sort of agree, because when you think about holidays, it's like you cannot care much for the content of the holiday, but you're still grateful that you have a reason to go visit your family for,
But that's fair enough. But that's the value in which you're judging it in the first place. That's not a reason to that wouldn't be conservation.
I'm just saying that the content of it doesn't really matter. But anyways, guys,
fair enough.
It's an instrumental value, I suppose.
I'm going to wrap it up because we got the debate about to happen. So I want to thank everybody for coming. If you want to check out the channel, it's Philosophy Power Hour on YouTube. We're going to upload this one along with the other two that we've uploaded. And I want to thank my guests, Dave, Dio, and Lewis, for coming along and having a chat. And yeah, and thank the audience for being here and participating with us, especially our longtime members that have continuously come.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Good lads.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.